Welcome to a Mendix Best Practices, how to use labels to manage workflow in the Sprinter. All right, guys, so I'm Nolan Ramsey, putting out a couple of short videos here to help people with some best practices that we've picked up over the years. In another video, I talked about how to create the story. So this one, I'm really going to focus on what do we use labels for? And there's a few different topics that we use labels for. Number one, it's a great tool for your developers or designers or whoever's working on that specific story to just, once they pick up that story in the current sprint and say, I'm the one that's going to work on that, you then can assign them to it as a label for easy reference. Sometimes it's good to know which person worked on which story, which requirement. So you could use it and do something like, Nolan worked on this particular label, on this particular story. Very useful. Another thing that we can use labels for are releases, for example. Like you definitely want this story to be a part of the release 1.1.18, for example. If that's the case, then you could just simply do another label and say, release 1.1.18. Okay, so now I've got a label, and then this is useful so that when I search my stories, I can find all stories that meet these different label conditions. It's very useful for project managers to be able to prepare their reports or anything that they need to escalate to management. But the most important way that we use labels, which is a little unorthodox, that is a best practice that I wanted to share with you guys today, is workflow. As you know, in Agile, there are really three steps of a workflow. There's the to-do. So I'm going to actually post this story. So there is the to-do. That means nobody's working on it yet. There's running. That means it's been moved from to-do over into the running status. And then finally, when you're done with whatever that story is, you're supposed to mark the story done. Okay, that's all well and good. But from a best practices perspective, there's a lot that happens between running and done. Let's be real. The same person that, for example, develops the piece of code that goes into this probably needs more than just their own unit test to certify that this is actually done. So it would make a lot more sense for the person that tests the code and make sure that it matches the definition of done that we talked about in the comment, or the product owner checking the comment for the definition of done, is the one who actually signs off on it and says, yes, I agree that this is actually done. It's not a best practice for the developer or the person that worked on the story to mark their own work as done, because then there's no way to certify that it actually met spec. So the other thing that we would use this for is to communicate workflow. So I might come in here and add something that says test ready, right? You can see there that I've got one. So I add the test ready label. Now, what is that useful for? So if a tester or a product owner comes in here and sees and does that filter up at the top and sees any stories that are marked test ready, they know, okay, there's something I need to go test today or right now when I have this availability, and I'm going to go run my tests on it. They'll look at the definition of done and determine whether or not it passed the test according to the specification. Now, another way that you can use test ready is when you're completed with that. If it passes, then you could just hit the button, make it go away, and post your story and mark it done. Now you've communicated as a tester that this is no longer test ready and it's done. And if you're worried about that from a workflow perspective, just to be clear, I'm going to go into the details here and just show you that down here in the Sprinter, they've thought about this. You can look at the view history, and this will tell you exactly when did I mark this story started, when did I mark that story done, so I'll have that tracking. Now, the other thing that is important about labels is, let's do the negative case. Let's go back to this thing and say on my labels here, so let's go back into my labels and say it was test ready and it failed. So now maybe I want to put something in here that says test failed. Okay. Now I don't mark the story as done. I leave it in the status that it is. So it's running still, because when I was testing, it was in running. So I've got it in running status. It's test failed, and I save. That's important because now as a developer, I can come back in here and I'll look at, okay, what stories need to get done? And yes, I know this is the backlog, but pretend for a minute that I'm in a sprint. which stories need to get done? And I look down here and I see this is running. Uh-oh, I see test failed. Why did it fail? Now, as a best practice, the person who failed the job should then have added a comment, right? And come in here and said, failed because I couldn't see just my employees. I saw all employees. Okay, that's going to tell the developer exactly what the problem was. Now, if they use their feedback tool during their testing, they could also bring that over and assign it as a task or a bug separate from this. So there's different ways that you can manage this. This is just one way that I want to share as a best practice. But they run their tests and they determine that, hey, this is no good. I saw all employees. That tells the developers, oh, I know what this problem is. I didn't put a filter or a constraint on my retrieve to go get my employees. Okay, simple enough. I'll go fix that, and then I will fix my workflow, change it from test failed, and I will make it test ready again because I fixed the problem. Okay, so again, you can get very creative with this. There's a lot of ways to use the labels as workflow items to kind of build out additional steps in your workflows or any other additional tracking that you want to do. It's important to use those things. It's also useful, lastly, that when you export your data, so if I were to export, and I'm just going to say a specific sprint, and I'm going to choose the backlog because I want that specific item. So first it shows you here. I'll just hit download. And a lot of people don't use this, but it can be really, really useful. If I open this up, it's going to open up in Excel. And what you can see here is all of the items that were in the backlog. Here is the story that I created here at the bottom. Here was the description. And what I wanted to show, if I go all the way to the right here, are the labels. And you can see that they are delimited by a semicolon. So there is a script. I don't have it ready at the moment, so maybe I'll do another short video about that. You can write a short little script in Excel that will break this data out because it is delimited by a semicolon into separate columns. And you can use that to organize if you have like labels as a way to combine different feature sets like releases, for example. Give me everything in the same release. You can also pre-filter your data, but hopefully this was pretty helpful and shows you some creative ways to use labels to manage the workflow in your Sprinter. Thanks.